This is Armenia Unlocked, a weekly edition from CivilNet, with your host and executive producer, Susanna Petrosyan.
Hello and welcome to Armenia Unlocked. Today we'll quickly recap the formation of Armenia's new government and parliament. And we'll discuss the developments regarding the Karabakh peace process. For that, we'll be joined by Lawrence Browers, who is an associate fellow at the Chatham House Royal Institute of International Affairs in London. Starting on January 14, Armenia's newly elected parliament, the seventh in the history of independent Armenia, began the first parliament session, which lasted for 5 days. This is the parliament that was formed after the December 9 elections. It is composed of 132 members representing 3 political parties. With 88 seats, Nikol Pashinyan's My Step Alliance holds a majority, Prosperous Armenia has 26 seats, and Bright Armenia 18. Now that the revolution and the transitional period are more or less over, Parliament has resumed its boring but still very important tasks. This first session focused on the procedures and rules that will make the institution, Parliament or National Assembly, run. We use Parliament and National Assembly interchangeably in Armenia. The members of Parliament elected Ararat Mirzoyan from the My Step Alliance as President of the National Assembly. Mirzoyan previously served as Deputy Prime Minister under Pashinyan. Lena Nazarian, also from the My Step Alliance, will serve as Vice President of Parliament. Both of them are former Parliament deputies, but of course under Serge Sargsyan's presidency, they were members of the opposition. Armenia's parliament allows for 1 president and 3 vice presidents. The other vice presidents are Alen Simonyan from the My Step Alliance and Vahe Enfiajian from the Prosperous Armenia Party. Also this week, Nikol Pashinyan was reappointed as Armenia's prime minister by the president, based on the parliament's proposal. He had resigned in order to trigger snap parliamentary elections, and Russian President Vladimir Putin immediately congratulated Pashinyan on the new appointment. The president also appointed Pashinyan's cabinet members. The prime minister has announced changes in the government structure. It is expected that there will be 12 ministries instead of the previous 17. The position of the first vice prime minister will also be abolished. The Ministry of Diaspora is going to cease operating as a separate unit and will be joined with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. In fact, Armenia's previous Minister of Diaspora, Mkhitar Hayrapetyan, is a new member of parliament, and he'll be heading the Parliament's Standing Committee on Science, Education, Culture, Diaspora, Youth, and Sport. The Ministry of Culture and the Ministry of Sport and Youth Affairs will be combined with the Ministry of Education and Science. The Ministry of Agriculture will become part of the Ministry of Economic Development and Investments. But more on this later. Now on to the Karabakh peace process. On January 16, Foreign Minister of Azerbaijan Elmar Mammadyarov and Foreign Minister of Armenia Zohrab Mnatsakanyan met in Paris, along with mediators from the US, France, and Russia known as the Minsk Group. The official statement following the meeting was the most positive one that the public has heard in many years. The high note was their agreement that the governments will take concrete measures to prepare the populations for peace. The ministers even agreed to work towards a summit between the leaders of both countries, Haidar Aliyev and Nikol Pashinyan. To delve deeper on this new development, we have on the phone with us Lawrence Browers from London. He's the co-founder and co-editor-in-chief of the Caucasus Survey, which is the first scholarly journal on the Caucasus region. He's also an associate fellow in the Russia and Eurasia program at the Chatham House Royal Institute of International Affairs. Hi, Lawrence. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
In the recent days following the meeting of Armenian and Azerbaijani foreign ministers, the announcements we have heard from both sides have been more positive than anything we have heard in years. Under today's conditions, what does it mean to prepare populations for peace on both sides?
Well, I think the most important thing here is to manage expectations very carefully. It's to avoid thinking about a big bang peace agreement, that we're suddenly going to have a breakthrough on these very stagnant negotiations. I think that's very naive and out of the question, and possibly even dangerous. We have had a decade of intense military competition. We've seen a major escalation of violence in April 2016 and a corresponding hardening of attitudes, including attitudes on some of the key issues at stake in a future peace deal. So, for instance, the idea of territorial concessions, of territorial withdrawals, is seen as much less feasible, not just in Nagorno-Karabakh today, but across Armenia. And the other thing I think is that we've been here before. In November 2008, Presidents Aliyev and Sarkisyan signed the Moscow Declaration, in which they committed themselves to implementing confidence-building measures. And in May 2016, the presidents again committed to a series of measures that are still unfulfilled. So I think skepticism is certainly merited, and we need to be very careful about expectations of some kind of a big breakthrough in the coming weeks and months.
And what can we expect from an agreement if both populations need prepping? Like you said, we need to be cautious, but what are some of the things to expect? And how is this preparation done on the ground?
Well, I think, we know more or less, and we have had consistently over the last 15 years, a set of basic principles known as the Madrid Principles. So I think, for those that know them, what's to be expected from a peace agreement is all there. The Madrid Principles have more or less disappeared from the public sphere, from public debate. They are very unpopular amongst those who do know about them. So I think there's a question about reevaluating those principles in the light of today's conjuncture. And I just wanted to say something also about this idea, this phrase of preparing peoples for peace. I think it's in danger of becoming one of those phrases that everybody uses without really nailing what it means. So I think
all we hear is, are the populations ready for peace? Is this side ready? Is that side ready? Who will prepare the populations? But maybe you can dissect for us what that really means.
Well, I think, what occurs to me is that preparing peoples for peace still sounds like a very top-down approach to the issue of peace and conciliation. People aren't just passive objects to be mobilized for war and then prepared for peace. And that's why, I think if you want to prepare societies for peace, the way you do that is you give agency back to the citizen rather than taking their views as a given. So for me, the real indication of how serious Armenian and Azerbaijani leaders are about this is when they normalize people-to-people contacts. These have been severely curtailed in recent years. So I think that's a crucial kind of first step. Obviously, alongside that, I think we need to see a continued reduction in frontline violence. I think it's very difficult to open up space for the discussion and debate of non-violent alternatives when you've got shooting going on and people dying along the front line. There's the issue of economic confidence-building measures. This was highlighted by the OSCE Minsk Group co-chairs in their statement last week. There tends to be a very favorable attitude towards economic confidence-building measures as a kind of a way to build confidence without politics, and they certainly have their role. But I think we need to see also a change in the political strategies of the parties. It means opening up this process to actors and narratives that have hitherto been excluded, and I think certainly that means giving more space to track two, to peace-building projects, and to bringing in actors who haven't had much of a say so far. So the Armenian population in Nagorno-Karabakh, likewise Karabakh Azerbaijanis displaced from the territory. All of these constituencies need to have a voice. And I think what's interesting is that we've seen a lot of change in leadership recently. The Karabakh Azerbaijanis, for instance, have a new leader. He's been leading a kind of a diplomatic blitz in Azerbaijan with international representations. I think we'll be seeing a new political leadership in Nagorno-Karabakh in the coming months. And I think these are constituencies that need to have conversations, not just with each other, but with a slew of different actors and on different issues. So, for me, the bottom line is preparing peoples for peace needs to be also a bottom-up process, and I think that will be the real test of what the foreign ministers have agreed to last week.
Mm-hmm. Tell us why the track to the people-to-people approach is so significant, and do you see any enthusiasm for reinstigating that approach?
Well, I think the idea of broad-based peace movements, that's generally in the world how peace movements and peace agreements have been most successfully reached. That's how you legitimate very controversial decisions. You need to have that bottom-up grassroots legitimacy to a process for it to come to difficult concessions and compromises. So I think we've seen very little in the way of visible track 2 contributions to this peace process. It's been a remarkably top-down peace process to date. But I think we see a new energy, perhaps particularly on the Armenian side following the Velvet Revolution that has changed the game. Several of the people close to Nikol Pashinyan have been directly involved in track 2 initiatives, and they have that perspective. Pashinyan is also following the elections in December. He has a solid mandate, a democratic mandate, and that may give him greater capability to face down more hardline approaches on issues in the peace process. So, I think this is a good moment to reinvigorate that track 2 process, to link it up to the track 1 negotiations, and for there to be a kind of interaction, circulation of ideas between these two processes. That's the ideal in terms of a multi-track peace process.
Lawrence, and you had a tweet recently that said, societies have various views, many of them not visible right now, but they tend to disapprove of war as resolution, and governments are not ready either. They have very little institutional capacity. What are some of those views that have been buried behind harsh political rhetoric in the last few years?
Well, I think it's been very difficult in recent years to get sociologically reliable polling data on issues relating to the conflict. That's especially the case, I think, in Azerbaijan. The conflict and the restoration of territorial integrity always feature as the sort of the number one public concern when people are asked to list the issues that matter to them. In Armenia, I think it's more straightforward to conduct that kind of research. There was an outpouring of national feeling on both sides in April 2016, but I don't think that can be read necessarily as evidence of how ready people are for a long, protracted war. And with that tweet, I was thinking back to some Caucasus Barometer data back from 2013, which was actually the last time that the barometer was carried out in Azerbaijan. And there was some data there that more than half of people on both sides answered that a solution was more or very likely to arise through a peaceful negotiation, and significantly fewer, so just 33% of Azerbaijanis and 20% of Armenians saw a solution by force as rather or very likely. So, I mean, those are not kind of clear-cut figures, but I think there are 2 points here. First of all, yes, there is radicalism in some parts of society, but I think it's a lot less monolithic than all this talk about the presidents being ahead of their peoples would suggest. And I think there is also an implicit demand in those figures for statesmanship. People may have diametrically opposed views on the future of Nagorno-Karabakh status, but they do aspire to a leadership that is capable of political negotiation rather than more militarized approaches and stockpiling weapons. So I think it's about uncovering and allowing political space for those views to be expressed. And it's not just about preparing the peoples for peace. It's about preparing states. There is a severe lack of institutional capacity of people who have that kind of delegated power to serve as envoys, to negotiate on the issues. So I think that also needs to be a priority area if we're to see any kind of movement in this process.
Mm-hmm. You have a book coming out this year called Armenia and Azerbaijan, Anatomy of Rivalry. Tell us what your title means.
Well, this book is intended to kind of push back against this idea of frozen conflict, and it reconceptualizes this conflict as a strategic rivalry between two states. And the book breaks down basically how this rivalry has deepened and broadened and widened over the 25 years since the ceasefire. So it looks at the geopolitics of space, different regimes of space in Armenian and Azerbaijani geopolitical cultures. And I also try to explain kind of why this rivalry has proven so resistant to mediation. So yes, it's due out later this year in September with Edinburgh University Press. So I hope to talk to you then as well and let you know more about it.
Thank you, Lawrence, for speaking with us today. I'm sure we'll be back asking you more questions in no time, and to also speak about your book once it comes out.
Thank you.
We have more positive news.
Great. Yes. All right. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak on Armenia Unlocked.
And thank you for listening to this edition of Armenia Unlocked. And for much more, follow CivilNet on Twitter, Facebook, and at civilnet.am. My name is Susanna Petrosian. You've been enjoying Beirut's music, and special thanks to our podcast producer, Sarin Habeshian.